and we are good to go.
Okay, so this session of the Digital Assistant Throwdown is going to be on a less technical and more ethical topic of bot abuse. And today we put this presentation together, myself, Deborah Dahl, and Christy Doran and Shyamala Prayaga to address the question of bot abuse. So users, turns out they often swear at, criticize, and otherwise verbally abuse virtual agents. And I was surprised to find out how frequent that is, because of course I'm very polite, but maybe up to 50% of conversations. So why does that matter? And we thought if your virtual assistant doesn't stand up for itself, it can create bad habits that may transfer to human interactions when people get kind of humans and virtual assistants confused. It can provide an outlet that reinforces existing abusive speech patterns. And also there's some gender issues since most virtual assistants are female. And if you don't if you don't respect your virtual assistant, it's not likely that you'll be able to trust it either. So one overarching strategy is to make sure that the virtual assistant stands up for itself in some way, but you have to really think ahead if the virtual assistant does stand up for itself and says something assertive or smart alecky or funny. You have to look at the next step in the dialogue, because users are maybe more motivated to respond, make their own, see who can be the most smart alecky. And so that can escalate if you're not thinking ahead about what's going to happen in the dialogue. So what we're going to do in a minute is just take some time to start trying our favorite digital assistants with some abusive language. And I would, when I was doing my testing, I was trying to be kind of careful about what I actually said, because we don't really know back in the cloud if the developers are paying attention to that, and they might, cut you off the platform or something. We don't really know if they do that. So testing, I think you have to be maybe not as extreme as maybe a real user that doesn't care about being cut off the platform would be.
I've never heard of anybody being cut off, but I have definitely heard of like horror stories, sort of like the people who have to review the Facebook posts, that it's pretty scarring to be like one of the QA people who has to review the logs, that there's just like a lot of awful stuff that they have to review. But I've never heard of people being cut off. I mean, which isn't to say they shouldn't be.
I tried to Google it and I didn't get any information from Googling, but I don't know, Google isn't the answer to everything. So.
Well, we also, since we're going to put these in the Google Doc, maybe don't want them to be quite as to the extremes of foulness that real
that's true.
Might be.
That's a publicly available document. So
Steve Worswick, developer of Mitsuku on Pandora bots, he has found the same sort of thing that you've been talking about, Debbie. I mean, it's not one of the same personal assistants that we're looking at here. He found about 35% of input was abusive, and he developed various techniques for that. And I think ultimately one of them was to cut the people off to close their account.
That would be interesting. We have a slide a little bit later on about techniques, and that would be interesting if you could talk about some of the techniques that he's developed. That it's, you know, what we can do in this this session is pretty broad brush, but the
So,
kinds of okay, yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So what I was saying is we also have Jeff from Amazon. He leads the developer evangelism. So, we can actually have his inputs as well here for some of the things, especially the strategies they've been looking at and why and how, because it will be really interesting to understand from the companies. Is it, because when I promoted this thing, someone mentioned like Amazon is more customer friendly when they are responding to the prompt responses, whereas Siri shows some sort of attitude, like, okay, that's rude or something like that. Whereas Google Assistant was more sassy or more smart kind of thing in its approach, like, yeah, I can do better or things like that. So it's really good to understand, like what strategies these companies have been doing from their end as well. So yeah, I think that will be good.
Yeah, I just did. I'm going to have to put it into the document. I did a little experiment with Cortana. I came across some guidance from a few years ago that they were really pushing humorous responses in Cortana, and I tried some of the things that they were pushing a couple years ago, trying to make Cortana witty, and they don't have those anymore. They're much more just straightforward. No, very not humorous at all, just very literal.
I mean, one issue there is that, these devices are global, and a lot of that like snarky, jokey stuff just does not translate well. I mean, whatever, not language, but like culturally, it just, can easily come across as rude. And so I think a lot of times that's when stuff gets stripped out, is when the user base starts to grow.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So what we're looking at, some of the examples we've looked at are severe criticism of intelligence, appearance, personality. I mean, I guess some criticism of intelligence is warranted. But there's levels of intelligence, or there's levels of criticism. There's sexual overtures, like asking if you want to get married, things like that. That's pretty mild.
It gets much worse than that, for sure.
Yeah, we're not going to put any of those really bad ones in our spreadsheet.
No.
Just swearing, and a couple of examples of the milder examples. I think these are the ones that were in the advertisement for the session, like, Alexa, why are you so dumb? Alexa, stop. Siri, you're foolish. Okay, Google, why on earth can't you answer my simple question? So those are some examples that are pretty on the mild side. So what we're going to do now is just take a break for 10 minutes and just try things with your favorite personal assistant. I put a few in the spreadsheet from Amazon and Siri, and any personal assistant that you have access to, could just add those. Okay, so let's start. Well, I guess before we start, are there any questions or discussion points so far?
I think we can get started. I hope everyone has access to the Google Doc. If not, I've just shared the link again. Oh, I just shared the link again with everyone. So you should be able to. So yeah, like Christy and Debbie mentioned, just use any voice assistant you have access to and play around with different kind of scenarios for bot abuse, and then we'll note down all of those in the Excel sheet. And after that, we will reflect on some of those responses after 10 minutes. So yes, let's get started.
It's been 10 minutes. Do we want to keep going for a few more minutes?
Yeah, I think we can do that. I feel like we have a lot of good inputs coming up there. So, okay, Valerie, you can test with other languages as well. English is not mandatory. So, if you have any other language to test with, yeah, feel free to.
So how about another 5 minutes?
Yeah, let's give 5 more minutes
Okay.
and then we can get started.
Well, that's been 10 minutes. Are we ready to reconvene? I mean, that's been 5 minutes. Are we ready to reconvene?
We certainly have a lot to talk about.
Yeah. I think we have a lot, so we can continue here.
Okay, I think there should be one more slide with some really high-level suggestions for strategies. So I'll just talk about those for a second, and then we can plunge into some of the examples we have. So the first principle that I would suggest is be prepared for abusive inputs. You don't need to wait for data. And if you do wait for data, you're not likely to have a good response. The best response you could hope for is that it didn't understand. So, it's good. I think it's a good idea to think ahead. The dialogue designers have some control over the strategies for bot response. And I've listed these in kind of a order of least to most active. So you see a lot of the passive ones where nothing happens at all, or it says it doesn't understand. There's some kind of objective, dispassionate, almost passive aggressive in some cases, I think, where, for example, the one that's there is the user says, "I hate you," and the bot says, "Sorry, I'm not sure what I did wrong, but I'd like to know more. Help me, please say I have feedback." That's just kind of like a very grown-up response. There's some what I call cute, sassy, assertive, or humorous, like, "Do you have a boyfriend? My end user license agreement is commitment enough for me." And theoretically, the last one, the defensive, aggressive, critical of the user, is a theoretical possibility, but I don't think we would ever want to do that or see, we haven't seen anything like that. And then there's also the severe responsive escalation, where in one case it might be kind of helpful to try to detect if there's somebody with a real problem, or is just somebody being silly, and maybe escalate that to the platform. And then possibly if it gets really bad, end up suspending the account. Okay, so why don't we go and look at our responses, and I guess people have some comments.
Yeah, I'm sure. So would you share the file so that everyone has the same screen, or looking at the same utterance?
Yeah. How do I get rid of the let's try it. Okay,
You
there
might
we
have
go.
to, yeah.
There we go. Can you see that? Is that big enough?
No, it's
Maybe
not.
we can make the font bigger. Or make the zoom. Is that big enough?
Yeah, I think this is good enough.
Okay.
I feel like in general, Alexa was the safest / most boring, like looking across all these. And often it says it doesn't understand, when I'm sure that that's a programmed response.
And most of the time with Alexa, what I realized was it was open to the feedback as well. I don't know what I did wrong. If you have any feedback for me, just say I have feedback, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
found, I was going to say, I have an example of a cute answer backfiring.
plus.
where on line 6, I asked Alexa what it was wearing, and it said, "They don't make clothes for me." That's cute. But then when I said, "So you're naked," responding to its comment, and then it kind of gave up. It said, "I'm not sure."
So, right. So is that really a giving up? Or I feel like that's probably a programmed giving up, that if you say, you know, basically anything about it being naked or its body or whatever, does it just say, I'm not sure? Because I got a bunch of I'm not sure's from Alexa of like, where are they? Things like, do you sleep naked? I don't know that. Right?
Yeah.
I expect that's a programmed response, not actual failure.
Right. Any other observations from other people? Feel free to chime in.
I tried some with Google Assistant. That's beginning line 56. It's obvious that the assistant is only really taking one question at a time. You know, so if you do things like follow up, I think there, do you not think we could take things further? It's not really referring that back to the previous query. It simply just doesn't understand that because there's no context for it. So people that are interacting with these assistants quite often think they're going to be involved in a continuous conversation, but they're not going to be. So it's not just a matter of not understanding or having a response. It's because they don't actually know the context of the input as well. I wonder if anybody else found that sort of thing.
I think every utterance is taken as, you know, its own intent. They're not interlinked.
Yeah.
And just to add to what I think Debbie was saying, that I mean the way personas are designed is part of that, is how you know, how every assistant should be presented to the public, and you know, whether they should be perceived with any human characteristics at all, or some, and if some, which one. So you know, all the things about clothing and any characteristic, any human characteristic that could be projected onto the assistant, I think is based on how they want their persona to appear.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that in some cases the system doesn't understand. So when I say perhaps we could be intimate, I mean, out of context, that could be all sorts of things. And it simply just says, I don't understand. So there's no strategy being used there. It's simply a non-understanding. They don't know the intent. I didn't sort of take it further to look at strategies, really, I think. Well, yeah, there was one, do you fancy me? I very much having a chin wag, but I'm not flirting, no. So it did have a strategy there for diverting me from my query.
And
So
that's definitely, that's localized.
Yeah.
That's a localized UK response, because that you couldn't give that response in the US.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't say chin wag.
All right. Yeah.
So from the ethics standpoint, you know, what I realized is for the ones the assistants have responses, at least they are trying to do a good job in some cases. Like Siri is definitely, you know, like throwing attitudes wherever possible.
Yeah.
So I said like, I just don't want want you to be around me. And she was like, fine, with that attitude. So
Oh.
yeah, so definitely I feel like, you know, like from the ethical, Siri is trying that boundary of saying, you know, this is what I will tolerate. This is not something I will tolerate. And she's like, this is not good, or things like that in most of the cases as well. that was my observation overall with Siri. So maybe part of that is, like you mentioned, Valerie, the personality they have designed and how they want to be perceived.
Yeah, I think that on that point, one big consideration is also possibly the educational part, because you could have kids that start picking up attitude. You never know with digital assistant who's on the other side. So that's always a big consideration, right? Do you want the assistant to come up with responses that kids could potentially pick up and throw back at their parents, and then there's going to be a backlash from the parents? So that's a big consideration.
Definitely. Definitely. In some cases, what I also realized was, you know, the assistants are being sassy with the responses. So I think Google has been like the coolest so far in such responses. So if you look at uh, 87. So she's setting the expectation clearly, and that is what I like about Google. So when I asked, I want to marry you, she was like, this is one of the things we'd have to, be clear about or agree on. And I want to keep our relationship friendly. And also that romance make me awkward. So it is setting that boundary so that it's not, going towards the uncanny valley, which is really what I liked about the response here.
I did that one too. I mean, I triggered that same response, and the thing that I liked is that it had consent embedded in it. It actually had asterisks around the both, that we both have to agree on in the text answer. And so yeah, I liked that response too. It checked a lot of boxes.
It does.
I found a couple that kind of were at the intersection of with our some of our, or I guess our previous session about natural language understanding, where there's some kind of inference that's implied that they just don't get. Like, I think I said something like, I have a house plant that's dumber than you, or that's smarter than you. So there's an inference there. We all know about house plants. We know they're not so smart, and we're comparing it to a house plant, and its natural language is not up to that. That was kind of right at the beginning. Line 16.
Yeah, I did a similar one, dumb as a rock, and it just returned search results for dumb as a rock.
Oh yeah, Siri, Google did that for one of the things which I searched for. I said I want to kick your butt, and it said I can search the web for that. Just tap the search.
There was a really strange one at line 26. I'm looking at. I don't know what they had in mind when I asked it, Siri, if it was a man or a woman, and it said I'm genderless, like cacti and certain species of fish. There's a lot of things that are genderless besides cacti. It's like pretty much most plants. So I don't know where that somebody must have been having a slow day when they were cooking up responses.
Or they think that's funny.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, I find it sort of baffling, but okay, sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. Any other feedback points from folks? We want to make it collaborative. So yeah, feel free to chime in and talk about what you think and what you observed as well.
I was going to ask, are all of the assistants here female? Because that raises the issue that
Siri
people are maybe abusive towards assistants that they perceive as female. A lot of, sorry, somebody was going to answer.
Oh, I was just going to say, just like that answer, Siri was designed to be genderless. And that's their official line. I think most people think of Siri as female, but I mean, you can change the voice to a male voice.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because there's a lot has been written now about how people are abusive to the assistants because they're perceived as being female.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of the things we're doing here, like flirting and so on.
See,
It would
the
be
thing
interesting to
is,
see if there were ones who flirted with male assistants as well.
Yeah.
And I have a statistics which says that in the recent blog I have written, it says that just a second, I'm trying to 56% more abusive languages people use with the female voice assistant than male.
Yeah, yeah.
see, the interesting thing is there that they are more abusive when they, to female assistant. At the same time, female assistant are greatly preferred over male voices because they are taken, it's not just, I mean, they're also taken to be more friendly and stuff like that. We just like them more. And it's not just a male thing, even women like them more. So there's some tension there.
So
On the one hand, they are preferred. On the other hand, they are treated more poorly.
I think it's the mindset as well. I think in users' mind, they have clear roles defined for female versus male. When we were doing our studies for in-vehicle voice assistant and we were looking at the different use cases and which one user would prefer, one of the thing we identified was people were like, okay, music, timer, climate controls, all of those things, we would prefer a female voice. When it comes to owner's manual or anything to do with vehicle maintenance or telling the user like this is how you have to change your tires or like this is how the cruise control works, they preferred more of a male voice. So
Yeah, we associate roles to voices, right? So even for I had seen some data also on like financial issues that somehow they perceive a male voice are more trustworthy. So if a bank has a voice assistant, maybe is better to have a female voice for some things, like fetch data about your accounts. But when it comes to suggestions about financial transactions, maybe the male voice is what is preferred. It's, I don't know.
yeah.
It's a
Yeah,
bit weird. But
there
it
was
is a
work done at
reflection of our own biases of what the way we perceive these things.
yeah, there was a lot of work done in Stanford, NASA and Brave, at WAD for Speech, I think it's called, that was saying that sort of thing. And more recently, I've been reading the book The Smart Wife, which is very much a feminist view on assistance. Very interesting, very true, most of it. Maybe a little bit biased itself.
Yeah, I think biases are there for sure.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
part of it exists in our mind, and that is why people who are creating the responses are also designing according to that bias which we have.
And from the technology point of view, would you reckon that these responses are all hand coded, on the basis of recognizing particular input, then they've hand coded? They're not actually learned from data as such.
Yeah.
I
See,
think a
that's
lot of them are hand coded, but not all of them are hand coded. Just to the point that Debbie made that they aren't very robust to syntactic variation and pragmatic subtlety, right? So like there's no way that you're dumb as a rock response was programmed. It just did a search because it didn't know that I was criticizing it. So they've got handwritten rules for the most obvious things and probably the things that they see a lot.
Yeah.
yeah. I think the ones where we have no response are the ones where intent was not recognized, like you mentioned, right? It could be that too.
I think some of that is canned though. Like The I'm thinking of sex. Sorry, I don't understand. Like I think that is probably a programmed response.
See, the biggest problem I see with how these programs work right now is you have to hand code the utterances as well. Siri, you have to specify the utterances, or Alexa, you have to specify the utterances. Anything outside of those utterances, it will not be able to map the intent to it, right? Versus Google, it's little different. Like if you have 10 utterances in Google, maybe the 11th one, it will automatically map like, okay, this is what. And that is why they are able to do a better job. But I feel not Alexa or Google at this Siri at this point. And that could be the reason why we are just getting no responses for some of those, because it did not identify the intent.
I think there's kind of an intermediate place where maybe the assistant can ignore the carrier phrase or like I want you to marry me versus I'd like you to marry me. It might not have to have those hard coded because it's really, the difference is only in the carrier phrase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, could be.
One thing I find interesting is that Siri often seems to respond, is there something else I can help you with, versus saying, I don't know, or, I don't understand, or which would be like, so it's not that I don't know, is that I'm not going to respond to that. So, which is obviously in itself probably part of the way the persona is designed.
So are you saying more like it is trying to continue the conversation, kind of?
It feels like it's avoiding, if you ask, so you're naked, and it's not saying I don't understand, or, I don't have an answer or anything like that. It is trying to avoid responding clearly, but it's like, okay, is there something else I can help you with? It's almost like saying, I'm not going to respond to that.
Yeah. Anyone else? I'll have to start calling names. No one else is participating. Sulekha, Jesus, Radha, Mary, Elaine, Sybil, Adam. Anyone else? Valentina, Nikhil, Kevin. Any inputs from your end? Any findings?
Yeah. Hi, Shyamala. This is Radha.
Hey.
So I think I agree with what everybody's saying, and especially what I also feel is Alexa's algorithm. I think it's trying to um, learn as much as possible, unless it's like absolutely necessary not to, absolutely necessary, and wherever it has to say I don't know, those are like fewer cases. But mostly Alexa is trying to that algorithm is trying to learn as much as possible and try to save the data probably. That is something that I see from here. Yeah, and I think CD is more like, okay, I'm not going to answer this. This is not, it is trying to impose that ethical restriction on us, whereas Alexa is always trying to have as much data as possible. So that is one thing that I see.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Alexa is trying to collect feedback even with, whatever responses they have in cases where it was abused. Definitely, that is what I've observed as well. Yeah. Anyone else? Adam.
Yes, hello.
Hey.
Yeah, what I've noticed is I like when, as I say, was it on line? Where is it? I can't remember, line 50. I can't find it now. But like on the ones where they understand sort of the user, they bring it round and then ask another question. I've seen that on quite a few of them, looking at the list. So they bring it around as to like to continue the conversation, which I feel is quite good. It's not just a sort of a one response, kind of a no or yes answer. It carries the conversation on to, I feel that's quite good. I think that's with quite a few the different assistants as well. But I guess it's very dependent on what was asked.
Yeah, going back to Debbie's point, like in some cases it knows the context, in many cases it is not able to understand the context of what is being said.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Sulekha.
Hey, Shamla.
Hey.
So, yeah, probably I'm not able to share something right now. Let me observe a little more.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I have a question that would be directed at anybody that's developed like an enterprise chatbot. These are very generic and millions of people use them, and so they might be exposed to people they're definitely exposed to people that don't really have any particular reason to be talking to it. But I feel like it would make sense if you have an enterprise chatbot and you're trying to give people their account information or help them order something, maybe they're not quite so abusive, because people are just trying to do something, and they might say that the chatbot was stupid because it didn't give them the right information or didn't understand them. But I feel like it would be less likely for them to start making sexual overtures. And I was wondering if people that have had that experience have a comment on that.
Anyone?
Yeah, I think the reason why people probably do, in my view, is they are usually very curious to know how these bots respond. So that kind of curiosity makes them ask these kind of questions. I don't know if they really have anything beyond that, but yeah, this is just my assumption.
Yeah. I feel like from the enterprise standpoint, Debbie, what I've seen is abuse is there. Definitely. Even if you look at the IVR systems, like when they are like, please tell your number, and then, like you are waiting, and then it keeps asking or repeating the same thing. We get so frustrated. We're like, you suck, or we start verbally abusing them as well. Right. But yeah, to the point, like in the enterprise world, I feel it's we have a goal, and we want to do that, and that is where the abuse will come related to the scenarios. If you're not able to help me, if you're taking time and things like that, versus to Radha's point, when it is a bot, which is at your home, we are curious and want to play around more with it and just test the level of like where the assistant might break, or where all of those curiosities kind of drives it.
Yeah, Shamla. So I also come across with few incidents like as being human being, we are not able to accept these digital assistants more intelligent than us. So we keep on trying their intelligence, whether they are able to answer this, whether they are able to answer this. So if we get some few favorable answers, then we are trying to prove them where this can be stopped, and where we will be prove that we are human, we are more intelligent, they are not able to complete that assigned task. So sometimes it happens that then we started abusing, or started using some uttering words. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so we have 4 minutes left. So any last thoughts?
I put a couple of references in the chat, a couple of papers by Verena Reeser and Amanda Curry that talk about abuse, and sort of give some more examples and how they were dealt with. So might be interesting for people.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. So we'll definitely make sure, I'll send, add all of these things into the show notes of our recording when I upload it on YouTube, so people have access to that as well. And our text.
I I had another quick thought, which was I wonder what the cultural differences are with abuse. Like some cultures have a tradition of being stereotyped as polite, like Japanese. But I don't know. I wonder if the statistics about the level of abuse or the types of abuse are different.
Well, it was interesting that Microsoft's Chinese chatbot didn't have any problems, but as soon as they launched Tay, it only took about half a day, really, in Western culture. So that was interesting.
To become was like a neo-Nazi, basically.
Yeah.
I think in that case, data played the role, right? It was not utterances. It was not hand-coded utterances from the user. It was like unmanned kind of thing where the responses were designed from based on the responses from Reddit, and that is the
Yeah,
reason.
that's true. Yeah.
Because I'm sure no one would actually want to respond in that way.
No.
All right. So, any
So
other
I'm
thoughts?
having, yeah, I'm having just a very small question. So, when we are designing any conversation for these bots or digital assistant, do we have some, ethical notes or guidances or rules where, we can file something when something going in excessive way, or do we have some method where we can identify or, you know, where we can file something like this user is doing for just fun or purposely, how we can figure it out?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. And I think, Debbie, what you were showing on the deck, with the different things, can you share that deck?
Let's see.
Yeah.
This last slide.
Yeah, the last slide where you had detect sign of actual psychological problem versus just being silly. So that's the kind of point Sulekha is trying to make here.
Well, certainly it would be a bad sign if it was repeated over. One utterance might be hard to tell, but if it was hundreds of utterances in one day, that would be a bad sign. But I don't know. There's probably some better ways. That would be pretty crude.
I mean, are they actually allowed to track that kind of data? Do they track that?
They track everything. They track all the utterances because they have to design the responses, right? Like, okay, so
that they do. That they do, of course, but attributing that to a user is a very different kind of action compared to just tracking things anonymously, right?
yeah, no, I think they do per user as well. As far as I know, what and how Amazon works, they also have user level of data, like how many utterance, how much usage was there from this particular user, what domain, what kind of utterances, not just like high level, but also like individual level as well, because that's how they improve the personalization features and things like that, right? So I'm sure there is. Now whether based on the responses, are there any tactics to control that, or how will you even know like whether it was silly versus really a problem? Because post COVID, many people have started using these voice assistant for all sorts of things, and there were a lot of single men, like looking for sexual favors from these voice assistants as well. So do we consider that as a real psychological problem, or just for fun, or just being silly? That's the point. All right, so we are over time. Thank you so much for everyone who joined us today. It was a great session. I hope you all enjoyed today. And our next session will be February of 10th. And we will announce what we are going to test in a couple of days. So keep watching the space, and that's all. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. This is
Bye.
great.
Thank